Super trainers are completely taking over the road running world, and On just released a monster for the roads. Meet the cloud monster, Hyper. What's up everybody, welcome to Rad Dad Bod TV. I'm Eric McIntyre, aka Rad Dad Bod, and today we're doing a little bit of a different video. We're actually going to be introducing the cloud monster Hyper and comparing it to the cloud monster 2. Now before I go any further into this video, please go ahead and like this video, but also subscribe to the channel, as I will be doing a 50-mile review of the Cloud Monster Hyper once I have those miles on it. But as the embargo is lifted on these shoes, I wanted to make sure I got a video out there to talk about the differences between these two shoes, because at first glance, they look almost identical. Now really quickly, from a disclosure standpoint, I was gifted these shoes from On for the purpose of review, but nor On or anybody else gets to watch this video beforehand, and these thoughts are entirely my own. Now, like I said, normally what I do in these videos is I actually will give kind of a specs breakdown, then talk about the good and the bad, but I don't feel like I've put enough miles on these shoes just yet in order to do that full review. So instead, we're just gonna kind of break down specs of each shoe one by one, and then we're also going to kind of compare the feel of the upper, the midsole, the outsole, all of that. Now starting off in terms of usage, the Cloud Monster Hyper is actually designed as a super trainer or marathon training companion to the Cloud Boom Echo series. I don't have the Cloud Boom Echo personally, but if you think about it, it kind of sits between the Cloud Monster 2 and then there's the Cloud Echo on this side, so it's almost a blend of the two in terms of usage. The Cloud Monster 2, on the other hand, is designed to be more of a max cushion daily trainer, so more like easy runs, recovery runs, while this one is going to go up to fast paces. You could even take these on interval sessions, and they're designed to kind of cover almost anything. As such, you would expect the price points to differ, so the Cloud Monster Hyper comes in at $219.99 or around $220. Meanwhile, the Cloud Monster 2 comes in at $179.95 or around $180. Now, traditionally, max cushion trainers are going to fall in that 160 to 170 range. So On, as usual, is a little bit higher price point than its kind of competitive counterparts in other brands, but that's just part of kind of their branding, part of their thing. And so if you like On, generally you're willing to pay that extra. On the other side, super trainers typically cost somewhere between like $180 up to about $200, right? The bigger comparison, and I'll break down specs, but this is priced very similarly to a lot of super shoes actually out there. And so it is on the pricier end. The closest comparison that I could find from a price point was the ASICS Super Blast, which I believe comes in at about $200. Now let's talk about the specs, how they compare and how they feel overall. So the Cloud Monster 2 comes in at about 297 grams in a men's size 9. Meanwhile, the only specs that I have from a weight standpoint on the Hyper are 265 grams for a men's size 11. So even with two sizes larger, the Hyper is supposed to be significantly lighter. And as I pick them up, it actually is pretty obvious that weight difference. I'll be honest though, when they're on foot, I didn't quite feel that drastic of a difference, but I also didn't wear them necessarily back to back. Stack height wise, this is 37.5 to 31.5 with a 6mm drop, and the Cloud Monster 2 has this at 39mm to 33mm for a 6mm drop as well. So the Cloud Monster 2 is going to be a little bit higher stack, while the Hyper is going to be slightly lower. From a fit standpoint, those who have tried the Cloud Monster 2 know that the upper fits very, very wide and somewhat long. So personally, I half sized down from my usual 10.5 down to a 10 in the Cloud Monster 2. And in the Cloud Monster Hyper, I did half size down as well, so these are a men's size 10. But what I'll tell you is that the upper fits not snug, but a lot more standard compared to the Monster 2. So the upper on the Cloud Monster Hyper is not excessively baggy. So as far as fit goes, I probably still would half size down on the Cloud Monster Hyper, but you might be able to get away with your normal size because it's not quite as overwhelming as the Cloud Monster 2. The midsole is where we start to see the biggest differences between these shoes. So when you hold them side by side, you can see that visually they are a little bit different. The Cloud Tech on the Cloud Monster 2 is a lot more pronounced and throughout the entire midsole, versus in the Cloud Monster Hyper, you can see that the Cloud Tech kind of shrinks here in the forefoot area. In the Cloud Monster 2, On used that Helion technology, or that Helion foam, which if you don't know is kind of a blended EVA foam with another compound called OBC. Basically, it just allows it to be soft yet still have the structure and allow them to do the clouds. Versus the Cloud Monster Hyper, they did update the foam to Helion F, I believe it's called, which is a Pebax or Peba based foam. I do still believe it's dual density, but my understanding is it's that Peba foam throughout the entirety of the midsole. Some other things to consider when it comes to kind of that midsole is that the Cloud Monster 2 actually has a nylon speed board within the shoe, and so it's going to be a lot more stiff and rigid versus the Cloud Monster Hyper has no stiffening elements within that foam, so it's just a thick slab of the foam and it's feeling very, very bouncy because of that. So how do those actually feel when you're running? Well, for me, the Cloud Monster Hyper feels like what I thought the Cloud Monster 2 was going to feel like. What I mean by that is when you look at this shoe, it looks like it's going to be very, very cushy, very, very plush, almost squishy, and just kind of bounce under your foot. But anyone who's run in the Cloud Monster 2s knows that it's actually a pretty stiff, pretty rigid, pretty firm overall feel underfoot. Now that doesn't mean that I did not enjoy the ride, but when looking at a max cushion shoe, what I expect more is kind of that squishy bounciness. And what I can say is with the Peba or Pebax based foam in the Cloud Monster Hyper, these are very responsive, they are very bouncy, they are very quick, and so you can take these up to faster paces. It really is a marathon training companion, which is really, really nice. And these pair really, really well together as far as maybe daily use and then your kind of tempo and threshold and long run use. What's interesting to me is that if you're a more traditional max cushion running shoe fan, then you probably wouldn't like the Cloud Monster 2, but you probably really would like the Cloud Monster Hyper, again, for all those different paces. It's just going to be a lot more versatile of a shoe overall. As far as the ride underfoot, the overall outsole and compound is pretty much identical. You can see that the Cloud Monster Hyper has just a little bit more rubber there on the outer side of the foot, but it still kind of has that cutout or that groove in the middle of the outsole, or the middle of the, I guess that's still technically the midsole there. And so you'll feel that the shoe does kind of guide you through as you run, and that's true on both of these shoes. It's an interesting sensation. I personally did enjoy it, but I could see where maybe some would not like it as they want something a little bit more free flowing under their foot. But as someone who has some slight stability concerns on my right foot in particular, having kind of that guiding system as well as that wide base made these for a very, very stable ride. And they really do feel almost identical in terms of just overall stability, just that the Hyper is going to be a lot faster and a lot more responsive overall. Another area where these shoes differ quite a bit is in the upper. The Cloud Monster 2 uses an engineered mesh, but the Cloud Monster Hyper uses a lightweight woven material. As far as just the overall lockdown, the Cloud Monster Hyper is a million times better, and that might not be an exaggeration. I found that the upper in the Cloud Monster 2 was just really, really baggy. It's very breathable. It's got a lot of room, so like if you got a really wide foot, they're probably great. But for normal foot-shaped people, it was baggy. There was a lot there. The Cloud Monster Hyper fits a little bit more traditional and still maintains a lot of that breathability with kind of this lightweight woven mesh here. From a lockdown standpoint, the Cloud Monster Hyper combines these laces that have kind of these rubbery elements on it, as well as some nice eyelets along the shoe. And it really kind of locks in place. The laces stay put, and so you actually don't have to worry about like retightening the shoe after you run, versus the Cloud Monster 2, sometimes you might have to stop and retighten those shoes. The laces kind of have a tendency to loosen up a little bit as you go. Now overall, as with most running shoes, this is really going to come down to preference, the firmness that you like, the fit that you like, just the overall heel to toe transition that you like in terms of shoes. But I hope that this video helps you kind of understand the differences between these two shoes. The reality is they're not supposed to be competitors. They're supposed to be basically training partners, along with, again, the Cloudboom Echo being your kind of marathon racing shoe. For me personally, again, it kind of comes down to the Cloud Monster 2 feels more like a standard daily trainer to me as opposed to a max cushion daily trainer, and the Cloud Monster Hyper kind of feels like more of a traditional max cushion shoe, but with some pop and some responsiveness. For me, I'm going to really like this, I think, for my long, easy runs, but as I'm doing more marathon pace work or faster, I may opt for something with an actual carbon plate or even a Pebax plate or something along those lines within the shoe. Now, I'm only sitting at about 25-ish miles for both of these shoes, so please stay tuned because in the coming weeks, I will get both of these to 50 miles, after which I'll do my full 50-mile reviews. As always, if you have any comments, questions about the shoe, go ahead and drop them in the comment section. And if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button and come back for more shoe reviews. So we've got a lot of really cool reviews coming in the next few weeks.